The question we're not asking is leadership really about visibility? Today, it feels as if everyone is talking about being seen. On LinkedIn, especially, the message is constant: show up, share your story, be authentic, build visibility. That's the formula. But I think we need to pause for a moment and ask a deeper question. Is leadership actually about visibility? Or have we confused visibility with credibility? Visibility can be manufactured. Credibility cannot. You can simply amplify visibility with marketing, algorithms, and content strategy. But credibility develops much more slowly. It develops through coherence between what you say, what you do, and the impact your actions have over time. And that's the distinction. Distinction matters now more than ever. This is what we're talking about today. Welcome to Unbox the Podcast. I'm Sahar Palmer, intuitive mentor and your host. Visibility is not the same as leadership. In the professional world today, there's a growing belief that if you're not visible, you're not leading. People are encouraged to share more, speak more, post more, and tell more stories about themselves. But leadership is not the measure of how often we see you. Leadership is measured by whether people trust what you stand for. That trust does not come from exposure. It comes from coherence. When your thinking, your decisions, and your behavior align with the values you claim to hold, people recognize that authenticity. They may not even be able to explain it immediately, but they do sense it. Visibility without coherence eventually exposes itself. Coherence, on the other hand, builds credibility over time. There is a misunderstanding around authenticity. Another idea that is circulating wildly is that authenticity comes from telling your personal story. You will often hear people say, tell your story so people can connect with you. But authenticity is not storytelling. Authenticity is coherence. It is not about repeating emotional stories from the past so people can sympathize with you or feel inspired by a particular moment in your life. Those stories may have value, but they're not the foundation of authenticity. Authenticity shows itself in the present. It is visible in how you think, how you treat others, how you make decisions, and how consistent you are between your words and your actions. In other words, authenticity is not something you narrate. It is something people experience when they interact with you. I'm going to say that again. In other words, authenticity is not something you narrate. It is something people experience when they interact with you. A story that really made me reflect on this several years ago, shortly after my husband passed away, I attended a large international conference focused on women and leadership. At that time, I felt the need to reconnect with the real world again. I thought attending a conference like this might help me re-engage with life. One of the keynote speakers delivered a very powerful talk. Her story was compelling. I was emotionally moved. I found it inspiring and it was extremely well delivered. The audience responded very strongly as well. When I returned home, I became curious. I looked her up online. I visited her website and watched her number of other talks. And then I realized something. She was telling the same story everywhere. The same story had become her entire platform. She traveled around the world, repeating that story, perfecting it every time, and she was very successful in doing so. She was invited to conferences as a keynote speaker, paid well, and widely recognized. But I also realized that that story itself had become the product. It was powerful, yes. It had a limited shelf life. It wasn't evolving. It was not building something deeper. It was simply being repeated everywhere. It became a business model. And that made me reflect on something very important. A story can open up a door, but it cannot carry the entire legacy, let alone leadership. The market has changed. There was a time when powerful personal stories were enough to create influence. Today, the landscape is very different. People are becoming more discerning every year. They're exposed to thousands of messages, brands, speakers, personalities. They can recognize when something feels superficial. As the advertising pioneer David Ogilvy once said, the consumer is not a moron, she's your wife. In other words, people are far more intelligent and perceptive than many industries assume. That quote stayed with me. When I was studying marketing and business strategy, it reminded me that the audience are not passive. They evaluate, they question when something doesn't feel genuine. Today, that discernment has increased dramatically. When someone is building visibility without coherence, the gap eventually becomes visible. And when the gap appears, trust collapses very quickly. We have seen this repeatedly in the business world, in media, even in cultural institutions. Reputation can unravel almost overnight when the external image and the internal reality are not aligned. So, what is authentic visibility? This is why visibility itself is not the problem. Visibility can be powerful when it reflects something real. Authentic visibility happens when what people see publicly matches what exists privately. It means that the message, the decisions, the behavior are all consistent. When that happens, visibility amplifies credibility rather than replacing it. But when visibility becomes the primary objective, people begin performing versions of themselves rather than expressing who they truly are. And audiences sense that. Authentic leadership does not require constant storytelling. It requires clarity about what you stand for and the discipline to act consistently with that clarity. A shift is happening now. We are entering a period where authenticity and profit are no longer opposing forces. For many years, business culture prioritized profit over everything else. Ethics, impact, and long-term consequences were often secondary considerations. But that model is changing. Clients, customers, and audiences now look more closely at how companies operate. They want transparency, they want integrity, they want alignment between words and actions. Profit still matters, of course. Business must financially be viable. But profit alone is no longer enough to sustain trust. The organizations and leaders who remain credible are those who understand coherence creates long-term value. So, what real leadership looks like? It looks like clarity. It looks like responsibility. It looks like understanding that every decision creates consequences that extend beyond immediate financial outcomes. Real leadership is not about visibility for its own sake. It is about showing up in a way that reflects values, your thinking, and your understanding of the broader impact of your work. When those elements align, visibility becomes meaningful rather than performative. So before I leave you, let's return to the question we started with. Is leadership about visibility? Visibility can help people see your work, but visibility alone does not create trust. Trust develops when what people see is supported by what you actually do. Authenticity isn't about telling emotional stories from the past. It is about coherence in the present. And leadership today requires more than exposure. It requires alignment between identity, decisions, and long-term impact. When those elements come together, visibility becomes a natural consequence of credibility, rather than a strategy for achieving it. If this conversation resonated with you, and you're reflecting on your identity, leadership, and professional direction alignment, you may find it helpful to explore brand clarity alignment work that I offer. It is designed for professionals and creators who want their visibility, their voice, and their leadership presence to reflect who they truly are and where they're going. You can find more on my website. And if you found today's episode valuable, please follow Unbox the Podcast so you won't miss the conversation. Thank you for listening. This is Sahar Palmer. Until next Tuesday, have the courage to be you. Show up and stay true.